As we have said before, inflation should be a tide that lifts all boats. But in practice, it usually lifts prices at the store well before it lifts the wages and salaries earned by workers. The short run is essentially the time it takes changes in the price level to go from showing up at the store to showing up in your paycheck. But this disconnect between inflation and wages requires a sort of mass delusion where people ignore or think there's nothing they can do about changes in their real wages or how much they can afford with the money they earn. The money illusion is what economists call that mass delusion. We are assuming that people are essentially fooled by the level of money income they earn. Tell me, if I gave you a 10% raise, but the prices of everything you pay for, from rent to food to everything else, also went up by 10%, would you consider yourself to be richer? Would you work harder for that raise? The money illusion says yes, you will. Even though you can't afford any more stuff with your 10% raise, you'll still work 10% harder for that raise. The money illusion is the theoretical foundation for the Phillips curve, which we examined before. Here, I've reconstructed it to get a better sense of what it says about the economy. Within our green band here, the economy is healthy and at full employment. But if the economy follows the Phillips curve with a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, then the Federal Reserve could reduce unemployment by creating some more money and causing more inflation. Higher inflation means lower unemployment and an overheated economy. Alternatively, if there's a contraction in the money supply, like there was prior to the Great Depression, then the economy might have to deal with deflation, and the Phillips curve tells us that deflation will result in extremely high unemployment. We saw that these predictions match reality, but this theory just didn't sit well with a lot of economists like Milton Friedman. Why would people suffer from such an irrational mass delusion about their nominal income like this? Here's an example to illuminate why the money illusion is so frustrating for economists to accept. Let's say Jonathan is working for the Rarotonga tribe, and they're paying him a nice salary. But then inflation raises the prices of everything in the economy, meaning that Jonathan can afford less on his same salary. The money illusion suggests that Jonathan won't do anything about this. He won't demand a raise or change his labor market decisions as a result of what is essentially a big wage cut. Even more frustrating is that the money illusion assumes that other tribes, like the Aitutaki, won't be willing to pay Jonathan what he is really worth, the same real wage he was getting before, and won't bother offering Jonathan better pay to lure him over, which would be a good deal for them both. But we've said that the short run is the time it takes for these changes in the economy to occur. Eventually, either Rarotonga tribe raises Jonathan's pay, or he's going to switch to the job that does raise his pay. But can we really believe that it takes everyone months or even years to make these changes? Do we really think that no one is going to try to capture the profit that can be made by offering wages adjusted for inflation, and that people won't take these jobs? The theory was in desperate need for a mechanism that connects the short run to the long run, something that explains why people would be making these systematic mistakes. In their landmark book, Friedman and Schwartz found that a contraction in the money supply meant doom for the economy. But they also saw that in more mild recessions, the money supply still went up, but much more slowly than in previous months and years. Remember, on the gold standard, the money supply changed mostly on its own, and with changes in reserve ratios. They concluded that the mechanism by which the money supply has an impact on the economy is by defying expectations. Both workers and firms are operating under uncertainty about future economic conditions. Firms want to be competitive, and they need to offer competitive salaries to attract workers. Workers also want to be paid fairly for the work they do. But who knows what inflation is going to be over the next year or two? We have to make guesses about it, and those guesses are usually going to be wrong. The economists Edmund Phelps and Milton Friedman developed the expectations augmented Phillips curve, which still shows a short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. But it's not raw inflation that matters. Instead, it's whether or not inflation is higher than expected or lower than expected. If everyone guesses that inflation will be 2% next year, and then inflation really is 2%, then everyone will have made all the proper adjustments for it already, and the economy will rest at full employment. This is in contrast with the original Phillips curve, which would say that any inflation will mean a lower level of unemployment. Here it is only unexpected inflation that matters. If there's more inflation than people expect, that means employers got a good deal and they will increase hiring. Essentially, they gave everyone 2% raises, but prices went up by more than 2%, giving them higher profits and leading them to increase production. If inflation is anything less than 2%, then these firms will be in a bind. Their costs of labor will be too high, and they'll need to lay some people off to make ends meet. The key then is to balance inflation with expectations. The Federal Reserve, with their control over the money supply, has the ability to manipulate the level of inflation. Edmund Phelps and Milton Friedman suggested that people had adaptive expectations. People base their inflation expectations on the recent past. So a business or a worker planning for the future will predict inflation will stay about the same as it has been in the past year or so. If this is true, then it will be changes in the rate of inflation that will impact the economy. Speed inflation up, and you will reduce unemployment. Slow inflation down, and you will slow the economy down too. Under adaptive expectations, the Fed can easily manipulate the economy. But some other economists, like John Muth and Robert Lucas, found this explanation as difficult to believe as the money illusion. This was just a different kind of illusion. Instead, they suggested people base their expectations on all available information. If the public is aware that the Federal Reserve has increased their bond purchases and is expanding the money supply, and this isn't to offset any reduction in government spending or something like that, then why would they be so foolish as to think inflation won't be higher than before? If it's easy for people to improve their predictions by just reading a newspaper, why would we think multinational corporations with an entire staff of people employed for the sole purpose of predicting future economic conditions would be getting this so completely wrong? It was a good point, and the devastation it would wreak on the Keynesian framework was only just beginning.